I am Tammy Schneider, and I am the Dean of the School of Arts, Humanities, and Religion that is sponsoring this. And I am thrilled to have all of you here. I see a lot of repeat offenders in the audience because we have had a number of events already this semester. So thank you for coming back, those of you that were here earlier. This is actually our second event this semester talking about women's ordination. Our first event was actually a joint dialogue with the Mormon women and Catholic women, and so this whole topic has been on the front burner at CGU for all semester, I guess you could say. We are very excited to have Father Roy with us, both for tonight and those of you who can make it tomorrow at 1 o'clock. He will be speaking in this room again on a slightly different topic, but you are all invited and welcome to join us tomorrow as well. I don't want to take up the whole evening blithering on, but I just want to thank you all for coming and remind you that because CGU is the first graduate program in the country with a program in women's studies and religion, these are the kinds of events and these are the kinds of things that we think about and talk about and invite speakers to discuss with us most of the time. And while she could not be here tonight, we are also the home of Karen Jo Torgerson, who wrote the book When Women Were Priests. And so again, tonight's topic is not something that we just decided to because we could nab Father Roy for this evening, but this is something that the whole issues about the role of women in religion and how that plays out both in the past and in the future. These are the things that we think about all the time, and we train our students to unpack what are the issues involved. So thank you all for coming, and with no further ado, and I want to thank profusely, the Women's Ordination Conference, who are co-sponsoring with this and have been very helpful and supportive, and thank you. So here is Marcy Cox, who is going to introduce this evening.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank CGU, Gina, for asking me to moderate tonight. The panelists, Dean Schneider, the School of Arts and Humanities, and Father Roy for fostering this discussion on women's ordination and the Catholic Church. I hope everyone's as excited as I am. So tonight's going to go a little bit like this. We're going to have a panel of 3 speakers. Each are going to speak for around 7 to 10 minutes, and then we will have Father Roy speak, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion. So our first speaker is Dr. Rosemary Radford Ruether.
Do you want the 3 of us up there?
I think that would work, right?
Yeah, why don't we come?
So you could look at your faces. So Dr. Ruether is a professor of feminist theology here at Claremont at CGU, if you don't know her. She's lovely, and a professor at CGU and at CST, Claremont School of Theology. She is also the Carpenter Emerita Professor of Feminist Theology at Pacific School of Religion and GTU, as well as the Georgia Harkness Emerita Professor of Applied Theology at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary. She has enjoyed a long and distinguished career as a scholar, teacher, and activist in the Roman Catholic Church, and is well known as a groundbreaking figure in Christian feminist theology. Rosemary is the author of multiple articles and books, including what has become known as a game changer in the field, Sexism and God Talk. Her most recent books include Catholic Does Not Equal the Vatican, A Vision for Progressive Catholicism, and Women in Redemption, A Theological History, the 2nd edition. If you haven't met her, definitely stay to talk to her afterwards. She's fabulous. So with no further ado, here's Rosemary.
Can you hear me? Okay. What I'm going to do is give you a little fast tour through history in terms of the contestation of women's ordination, the arguments back and forth, and then I'm going to pick up an issue that has been contested to some extent within contemporary Roman Catholicism, namely the relationship of women priests and women church. and I'll try to say something about my view of the relationship of these two things. Starting first with the contestation of women's ordination. The ordination of women has been debated, fought about, contested, really from the first generation of the Christian church. Women were in ministry in the Pauline churches, and yet Paul's successor, Timothy, rejected this with the vehement declaration, "I permit no woman to teach or to have authority over a man. She is to keep silent." That's 1 Timothy 2:11-15, in case you didn't recognize it. And this is interesting. This is a statement which actually itself testifies to the fact that some women, in fact, were teaching and in a position of authority. In other words, you don't tell people not to do something if they are not doing it, right? So the very statement itself indicates that women were, in fact, teaching and in positions of authority. Now, some women continued to be accepted into the Eucharistic ministry into the 4th century. Christian leaders again continued to argue this was not acceptable. And yet, even then, the ordination of women to the diaconate continued in the Western Church to the 12th century, when canon lawyers ruled that maleness was a necessary qualification for ordination in order to represent Christ, a male. And this view was reiterated in the theology of Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, who used Aristotle's anthropology to define women as inherently defective and unable to exercise leadership in either the church or society. This conflict was again renewed in the 16th century Reformation, when Luther and Calvin claimed women's exclusion from preaching or ordination, and yet the Baptists were on the left in those days. The Baptists in the 16th and 17th century England used the New Testament text, "In Christ there is no more male or female," to affirm public ministry for women. And the Society of Friends in the second half of the 17th century gave women equal access to leadership and created independent, quote, women's meetings led by women based on their belief that the original teaching of Christ affirmed women's equality with men and their equal access to apostolic gifts. Moving right along to the 19th century. In the 19th century, women's equality in ministry again surfaced as an issue. The Congregationalists ordained the first woman minister, Antoinette Brown, in 1853, and Luther Lee, the minister that preached at her ordination, cited the New Testament text, guess what? "In Christ there is no more male and female. And your sons and your daughters shall prophesy," in order to affirm that women had indeed been given the ministry by Christ in the very beginning, and the church had erred throughout its history by denying women this role. The Methodist Protestant Church began to ordain women in the 1880s, but lost this right when it merged with the larger church, the Methodist Episcopal Church, in 1939, only to have the ordination of women reinstated in the United Church in 1956. The Presbyterian Church USA, the Northern Presbyterians, voted to ordain women as ruling elders in 1930, but denied them the status of clergy. Only in 1955 did they open up the full ordination of word and sacraments to women, and the Southern Presbyterians accepted this only in 1964. The Lutherans voted to ordain women in 1970, but the conservative Church, Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod rejected this and continues to this day to reject it based on their readings of New Testament texts. The Episcopal Church USA rejected women's ordination on a technicality in 1973, and then several bishops went ahead and ordained 11 women in 1974, and the General Convention of the Church then reversed their decision and voted to accept the ordination of women in 1976, including the irregularly ordained 11. Of course, today the Episcopal Church throughout the world, including the Mother Church of England, now ordain women. So that's just a little quickie of the ridiculous back and forth that has gone on for 2,000 years on women's ordination. Having given you a little taste of that, I want to then pick up the idiocy of Roman Catholicism. We don't want to be any less idiotic than anybody else. Okay, this issue became present in Roman Catholicism in the 1960s. The St. John's Alliance, a Catholic women's suffrage group founded in 1910, petitioned the Second Vatican Council to consider the ordination of women in 1965 and continued to submit these petitions yearly thereafter, but without response. In 1975, in response to the debate in the Episcopal Church USA, the American Roman Catholics convened the first women's ordination conference in Detroit in 1975. Now, the Vatican's response to this Episcopal Church decision, as well as the growing movement for women's ordination among Catholics, was the 1976 Declaration on the question of the admission of women to the ministerial priesthood. This declaration asserts that women are not ordainable by their very nature as females. Accordingly, the Catholic Church's refusal to ordain women is not a matter of social discrimination against women, because the Catholic Church fully accepts women's civil rights in society, but it cannot ordain women because of the incompatibility of the priesthood with the nature of women. And this ban is divinely founded and unchangeable. It is based on three reasons. Jesus intentionally did not include women in the ordained priesthood. The Church is continuous and therefore infallible. See how you quickly jump from continuous to infallible. The Church is continuous. You could be continuously in error, of course. The Church is continuous and has infallible tradition, has excluded women from priesthood, and the priest represents Christ, a male. And maleness is intrinsic to the nature of Christ, and so women are incapable of representing Christ as priests. Now, this assertion evoked a storm of criticism among Catholic theologians and biblical scholars. Biblical scholars repudiated it as unbiblical. Some theologians, including the eminent Karl Rahner, even suggested that such literal essentialness about Christ's maleness and its necessity for his sacramental representation was heretical. And polls show that the percentage of U.S. Catholics supporting women's ordination expanded by several decades of points, expanded to more than 60% after the Declaration. In other words, the Declaration had a great aid in expanding women Catholic support for the ordination of women, and the Women's Ordination Conference began to organize local women's ordination groups after 1975, and in 1978 held a second conference. However, And this is where we get into the women's church, women priests debate. However, at the end of the 1970s, some leading Catholic feminists, such as Mary Hunt and Elizabeth Fiorenza, began to doubt that women's ordination itself was a desirable goal. They believed that clerical hierarchy was the problem, and incorporating a few women into the clerical hierarchy, as was happening in some other churches, would not solve the problem. Rather, women should create alternative women's liturgical groups or feminist grassroots communities where all the members could participate as equals rather than dividing the church into a hierarchy of clergy and laity. And they called this vision of a feminist worshiping community Women's Church. In 1983, these Catholic feminists organized a third national gathering in Chicago to focus on the idea of women's church and the promotion of women's church communities. And subsequent women's church conferences were held in Cincinnati in '87 and Albuquerque in '93. And out of these meetings emerged the Women's Church Convergence, a network of Catholic feminist liturgical reform and social justice organizations across the United States. Now, a new challenge came on the scene with the Roman Catholic claims to ordain ministry in 2002. In that year, 7 women from Germany, Austria, and the United States were ordained priests on a boat on the Danube River by several male Catholic bishops. And several of these women were subsequently ordained bishops by these bishops, and they in turn have continued to ordain women deacons, priests, and bishops, and this movement is developing very fast in the United States and Canada. Well, there's about 40 or 50, right, women priests?
I think we're up to about 120.
About 120, hey. As I said, fast. 120 to the present time. Now, of course, the Roman Catholic women priests have been repudiated by the Vatican, who has declared them excommunicated. That hasn't stopped them at all, of course. And some Catholic feminists, however, have been also suspicious of them, but for other reasons. In the Vatican, wondering whether they are too hierarchical. So what I want to end with is the question, what should we think about the relationship of women priests and women's church? Are they incompatible? Should a movement to create Catholic women priests and bishops claiming apostolic succession be rejected by those who are committed to egalitarian, non-hierarchical communities of sacrament and solidarity, to use Mary Hunt's term? Now, my own conclusion, and we can talk about this later, but I'm going to just throw this out here. My own conclusion is that these two movements are complementary rather than being in conflict. Basically, I am inclined to see women's church and women priests as operating in different contexts and different organizational frameworks. A women's church worshiping community can afford to be informal. It can afford to pass around liturgical leadership with no designated pastor or pastors, and I myself belong to such a woman church group. But when you are dealing with a weekly liturgy of 75 to 100 or more people, as well as educational events, social ministries, monetary contribution, all of these kind of activities of a church, a more formal structure becomes necessary. And moreover, many women's church groups are in fact only for women, and so they fail to create worshiping communities for men and for families who tend to have male members. So I ask, what then is ordination for? I suggest that to formally designate pastors who are recognized as having administrative, counseling, and sacramental roles on behalf of the community is vital and can be vital for creating community. Designating a person as a priest recognizes that person as both leading the community and in some way representing it. And this becomes, I think, important when you have this larger and more formal kind of group. And so basically, I argue that women church and women priests both have their place in a renewed church and a renewed priestly ministry. Take it away.
Our second panelist is Dr. Jane Villa. She is a Roman Catholic Womenpriest, co-founder of the Mary Magdalene Apostle Catholic Community in San Diego, and board member of the Women's Ordination Conference. She received her PhD in religious education at Marquette University and earned a JD at the University of San Diego, where she was a tenured professor in theology. She's also a prosecutor. She left academia to pursue a career in law in an effort to work towards ending injustice. She continues this pursuit today, acting as a revolutionary in the Catholic Church, demanding an end to discrimination against women. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think my role here tonight is to show you what a Roman Catholic woman priest looks like. There are some that wear Roman collars. I'm not one of them. And I'm really committed to the declericalization of the Roman Catholic Church. So insofar as I participate in any way, shape, or form in a community connected to the Roman Catholic Church, declericalization is one of my main priorities. The Roman Catholic woman priest movement has grown enormously quickly between 2002, when there were 7 women ordained, to now where I understand there were 6 women ordained in Atlanta just this past weekend. There were 2 women ordained in LA about 3 weeks ago. There was a woman ordained in Oakland about a month ago, or 2 or 3 months ago. So it is growing very quickly. And as an attorney, I would like to say that I think the reason the movement is growing so quickly in the United States and in Canada is because of the separation of church and state. Women in Europe simply can't do the same kinds of things that women in the United States can do once they're ordained, and I'll say a bit more about that later. I've been asked to also share with you my point of view about why it's important to have women priests. And actually my doctorate was in New Testament studies, and I mention that because teaching the New Testament, as I did for about 9 years to undergraduates, completely radicalized me. I went from a Catholic graduate program in which essentially I learned nothing about the role of women in the early church to having to prepare every day and every night to teach undergraduates the next day and to teach from the text itself. And what I learned is that I had not been taught about all the women followers of Jesus. I had not been taught about his relationships with women. I had not been taught about his attitudes and conduct towards and with women, which from my perspective can be honestly characterized as feminist in his time. And teaching Scripture completely changed my view of women in the church and the role of women in the church. The church does matter to me. I'm not someone who is going to walk away from the church. My personal attitudes about that are that I'm intelligent, articulate, I'm well educated. If every voice like mine leaves the Catholic Church, there will be no one left to speak for women. Thank you. This is a church that's built on a political model. The political model is monarchy. Monarchy is totalitarian. Everyone who participates in the execution of this monarchy, its positions, its laws, its rules, its influence over society, is male. Why is that? Because only males can be validly ordained according to canon law. And who makes all the decisions? Clerics. So for me, a very important reason for women's ordination to exist is that women will never have a voice in the official hierarchical, and I want to emphasize that because I couldn't agree more that the Catholic Church is not the same thing as the Vatican. The Vatican is a teeny tiny group of very powerful, elderly, mostly Caucasian European males. That's who they are. But the power they exert over women and children, especially in non-industrialized societies worldwide, is enormous. Women will never be able to push their way into that power structure without becoming ordained first. I've seen this happen in I'll call it my law office in San Diego County. It was a public law office. So I anticipate that it's going to happen in Catholicism as well, when women eventually do step into positions of leadership in the Roman Catholic Church. And that is that the first women who got ahead and got positions of authority were women who kissed ass, slept with their bosses, or otherwise made themselves invaluable to men in power. That's how it started. I'm really happy to say that in my 25-year career, I have seen that change significantly. I have not seen it change sufficiently, but I have seen it change significantly. So I think we have to anticipate that sociologically something similar is going to happen when women actually step into positions of power in leadership in the Roman Catholic Church. The Catholic Church wields enormous power in non-industrialized societies. The misogynist attitudes of the Roman Catholic Church towards women, which they try to cover up with nice language, like some of that language that Rosemary read you, in fact impacts not just church in these non-industrialized societies, but it impacts the society as well. Their attitudes about women become the sociological foundation to prevent women categorically from ever realizing their gifts unless they happen to be wealthy. If they have money, it's a different story. But the vast majority of women, of course, don't have money. It becomes the sociological and philosophical basis for not only sexism in society, but domestic violence, child abuse, and other forms of the abuse of women. We don't have to look any further than the past 5 years at the Catholic Church to know that the attitudes of the official church, the Vatican, towards women have impacted the attitudes of the church worldwide towards children, right? We know that protecting children from abuse is not a priority. Preserving face is a priority. And cover-up continues to be the primary approach of the official institutional church, despite what's said in public documents in many, many dioceses in the United States. So for me, I can't just walk away from this church and say, it's not my problem. I want to be an Episcopalian. It is my problem. I'm complicit in whatever those official people do in the name of the Roman Catholic Church. And so, even though I know that Matthew Fox has recently written a book called The Pope's War, and he takes the position in that book that it's impossible to change the church, it's not the point to change the church, I do what I do because I believe that someone has to try to change this hierarchical, powerful, sociological, religious institution that impacts so many lives worldwide. That's why I think women priests are important. In my own experience, in addition to Scripture radicalizing my life, I'd like to say that I was part of a women church for many years in San Diego. In fact, it was a walk group, so my continual gratitude to the Women's Ordination Conference is very real. But I happen to be a person for whom the effort to eradicate hypocrisy in my life is important. I believe all human beings are subject to it, and that it requires a lot of constant, personal, intentional scrutiny to avoid hypocrisy, self-delusion, denial, and all the other negative qualities that interfere with our ability to operate authentically in the world. In my life, I'm married. My husband and I are happily married this year, as of 30 years. He is my best friend. God chose to give me 2 sons and no daughters. So I've always said that keeps me honest. And as a family, we could never participate in women church. There was no place for my family to be in a woman church context. And even though I grew enormously in the context of women church, and I would never give up what I learned there, by the time I became ordained, I knew that what I needed to do was found a parish for men, women, and children, for people of all ages, for marginalized Catholics, for driven away Catholics like my husband, fallen away Catholics like my now adult sons, for gay and lesbian Catholics like my colleagues in my law office, for divorced and remarried Catholics who did not have an annulment, and for Roman Catholics like me who could no longer worship with integrity in a canonical Catholic church. So after I was ordained a deacon and before I was ordained a priest, we founded this little parish in San Diego, California, called Mary Magdalene the Apostle Catholic Community. We now have about probably 150 members on the books. We're, at this point, if you count the children, we're up to about 90 people at Mass every week. This year we have our 3rd First Communion class of 5 children, 2 boys and 3 little girls. We are a full-service Catholic parish. The only thing we don't have is a school. So that's how I have tried to realize my vision in the context of Roman Catholic priesthood. But the dangers within the Roman Catholic Womenpriest movement are very real. The need to constantly remind ourselves about the importance of renewed Catholic priesthood is critical. There cannot be renewed Catholic priesthood, in my opinion, without radical, complete declericalization. Thank you.
Our final panelist tonight is Dr. Gina Messina-Dysert. She's a good friend of mine and a fantastic, fantastic professor. She is the visiting assistant professor of theological ethics at Loyola Marymount University, the director of the Center for Women's Interdisciplinary Research and Education here at CGU, and co-founder and co-director of the very popular blog Feminism and Religion. She has authored multiple articles, the forthcoming book Rape Culture and Spiritual Violence, and is co-editor of the forthcoming anthology Feminism and Religion in the 21st Century. She recently began production on the documentary film The Stained Glass Ceiling to explore the current position of women in the Catholic Church. Her research interests are theologically and ethically driven, involve a feminist and interdisciplinary approach, and are influenced by her activist roots working to end injustice against women.
Thank you, Marcy. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Let me start by saying I'm grateful to be here as a Catholic feminist and as a woman and as a member of the human community, because although women's ordination is often spoken of as a Catholic issue or as a women's issue, I think it's important for all of us to realize that it's a human issue. As a woman who supports the cause, I'm often asked if I'm called to be ordained, and I explain that while I'm not called to the priesthood, I am called to end discrimination, something that I think is an important role for all of us. So tonight I would like to talk about, first, the stained glass ceiling in the Catholic Church, and second, I would like to explore discrimination as part of the larger problem that impacts our global community. As many of us are well aware, there is a stained glass ceiling in the Catholic Church, and although women have repeatedly been called to the priesthood, according to the Vatican, God must have called the wrong number, since they are excluded by their gender. It was the early 1980s when I first realized there was a stained glass ceiling. My brother was an altar boy, and I found myself very jealous that I was not allowed to participate in Mass the same way that he was. And I would often ask, why can I not be an altar server? And the response was always accompanied by a laugh. You are a girl, so of course you can't be an altar server. That has changed somewhat since the 1980s, but we know that we're reverting now when many churches are refusing girls the opportunity to participate and serve. So, recognizing that I was excluded from being an altar server because of my gender also led me to understand why there were no women priests. Unfortunately, it was something I had readily accepted. As a young person, I did not realize I could challenge the absence of a gender perspective at the pulpit. And it wasn't until fairly recently that I realized how crucial it is to demand that women be ordained. There is consistently a cultural violence against women in the Catholic Church. An examination of history demonstrates a legacy of relegating women to a subordinate position, refusing them access to contraception and particular health care services, banning them from leadership roles, and demanding that women either be wife and mother or cloistered. In addition, women are told they must live up to an impossible standard. In the Catholic tradition, Mary is celebrated for being a mother and a virgin. Mother to the world Savior was simply not enough for this woman. So continuing to refuse women their sacramental and human right to be ordained allows the Catholic Church to continue this culture of violence against women. With the stained glass ceiling intact, women and men are given an ultimatum. Play by the rules of the original Good Old Boys Club or risk eternal damnation. To speak out as a Catholic and call for women's ordination leaves you exposed and in danger of having limited employment opportunities, of being terminated, and of being excommunicated. In other words, to be Jesus-like, to be revolutionary, to call for an end to oppression, and the acceptance of every person can lead to you being expelled from the Catholic community. In fact, according to the Vatican, to support women's ordination is to commit the gravest crime against the Church, one that compares to pedophilia. However, it's noteworthy that no pedophile has ever been excommunicated from the Church. Some claim that the Vatican is the Catholic Church, and that I am excluding myself from the tradition by calling for women's ordination and taking a stand against the Vatican's position. While the Vatican is part of the Church, so is the community of Catholics of which I am a member. I believe that to claim that the hierarchy of the Vatican is the true Catholic Church is not only dangerous for women's emotional and spiritual health, but also that of the entire community. Looking outside of the Catholic Church, we see that the Vatican plays an important role in the global community, with the Holy See having a United Nations status. Thus, the Vatican is uniquely positioned to influence international deliberation on a wide range of issues, including those pertaining to women's rights. No other religious tradition claims a seat at the table the way Catholicism does. And it is through this role that the Vatican wields its power to participate in continuing a global culture of violence against women. The Catholic Church, or Catholic Church officials, are also very active in public policy and laws outside of the United Nations. For instance, recently, the Los Angeles Times had an article on the front page that was about the Catholic Church fighting a reproductive health bill in legislature that would allow Filipinos the access to contraception. The headline read, "Filipinos want it, priests don't." With the Philippines capital being one of the most densely populated places on earth, poverty is rampant and women and children are dying of starvation and disease. However, priests have threatened the community with withholding communion if they vote for the reproductive bill. Regardless of one's religious affiliation, the Vatican is working to keep women from having access to reproductive health care services, and the results are devastating. With these actions, the Vatican is taking stances on gendered issues from a male perspective with no experience or knowledge of the direct impact on women. We must ask, how would these actions change with women in leadership roles in the Catholic Church? Catholics have a responsibility to bring the innovations of the world to the tradition so that it may grow. In this way, we allow the Church to develop, expand, and continue in an ever-changing society. Again, we must remember what it means to engage in the mission of Jesus. It means being revolutionary, breaking rules to work for the betterment of community, and uplifting those who have been relegated to the margins of society. Working for justice is the act of a true Catholic. Denying women the right to be ordained does continue a church tradition, and it's called sexism. This war against women has waged on for far too long, and we must put an end to this injustice, as it is a violation of the mission of Jesus. As long as women are refused any role, our full humanity continues to be denied. Thus, the responsibility to demand the ordination of women in the Catholic Church falls on the shoulders of us all. Thank you so much.